I'm Adrian, and today we're taking an in-depth look at Chris Redfield's fighting style in the Resident Evil video game series. Chris Redfield made his debut in the original 1996 PlayStation game that started the franchise, Resident Evil. He went on to appear in several installments in the long-running series and was most recently seen in Resident Evil Village. The goal of these videos is to figure out just how many fighting styles our combatant is familiar with by analyzing the specific moves featured in their footage and pairing them with the martial art or fighting style which most aptly represents those moves. There's a huge amount of crossover in martial arts techniques, and a technique that is present in one fighting style may also be present in another, such as a roundhouse kick being present in multiple martial arts. But in order to not give combatants multiple fighting styles for the sake of variety, I have instead opted to list the most apt fighting style that best represents that particular character, technique, or set of techniques. Also, there are various degrees of knowing a fighting style, and although one may know elements of something, this doesn't mean I'm saying the fighter I'm talking about is a master in every style I mention. I highly recommend playing the Resident Evil games, as this video will analyze footage from Resident Evil, Resident Evil Remake, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles, Resident Evil Revelations, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Resident Evil Village, as well as a couple other games. That being said, do take this as your spoiler warning. Fighting styles that Chris Redfield may know in any other form of media, such as novels, animated films, live action films, or crossover games, such as Fortnite or Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, do not count. And to be hyper-specific, I'm aware that the CG films are canon and take place within the storyline of the main games. But this isn't a question of canonicity, it's a question of format, of the medium. That would be like including novelizations and graphic novels in a film analysis, or video games in a movie analysis. In this case, we'll be looking at the Resident Evil main storyline games, not the films, nor the animated films, regardless of them being canon or not. Without further ado, let's take a look at how many fighting styles Chris Redfield knows. Before Resident Evil even begins, Chris had been with the United States Air Force and trained with a variety of weapons, including knives. He was also known for his skills in hand-to-hand combat and marksmanship. So what CQC style does the Air Force use? The answer's a little complex. During the early 50s, Emilio Mel Bruno, a highly accomplished martial artist, designed a CQC program for the Air Force, which would eventually become Air Force Combative Measures. It was a comprehensive 155-hour course that combined training from several fighting styles. It was dropped in 1966 to reduce training time, and it wasn't until 2007 that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force ordered a review of all hand-to-hand combat. This new CQC system would eventually become a shortened version of the Army Combatives program, known as Air Force Combatives. For more information about combatives, please see my Jill Valentine Fighting Styles video. In any case, what happened during those years of not having a standardized hand-to-hand training program in the Air Force? The remaining instructors kept teaching their own independent spins on what they had learned from the Air Force Combative Measures Instructors course and would pass that on. Since Chris was in the Air Force well before 2007, he would have been part of this kind of training. We now find ourselves in the beginning of the first Resident Evil. Chris is part of an elite team known as Special Tactics and Rescue Service and just narrowly escaped an attack in the Arklay Mountains, finding himself trapped in the maze-like Spencer Mansion. He encounters zombies, but having never before seen them, he barely fights back. Due to his experience with combatives, he is trained in using different weapons, including the handgun in both the original game and the remake. He can also shove them away and use his elbow to shove them backwards, but it's not exactly a strike just yet. In the remake, he still shoves them away, and he can also use his knife in combat and in self-defense. In Code Veronica, which takes place after the mansion incident, he's gained a bit more confidence in his technique with zombies. He no longer just shoves them back, he begins to throw a reverse elbow strike, no doubt from his combatives training. When attacked from the front, his shove is much more aggressive as well. Like Jill, he also stomps on the enemy given the chance. In terms of hand-to-hand combat, he gets a chance to demonstrate his skills when he goes up against Albert Wesker, and things do not go well. At all. Wesker kicks him and punches him repeatedly. Chris tanks the hits, but is unable to counterattack. This is significant in terms of his hand-to-hand combat development, as he realizes he's going to have to undergo much more training to be able to stand a fighting chance against Wesker. What is important to note is that Chris did have training, he just didn't get a chance to show it as he was completely overpowered by Wesker. As seen in the Umbrella Chronicles, a retelling of the events in the Resident Evil games, Chris can throw a hook at his enemy followed by a spinning sidekick. In Darkside Chronicles, Chris can bash the enemy with a spinning back fist, a sidekick, a straight up cross, and a roundhouse kick where he follows through. The back fist and kicks indicating training in karate, which makes sense considering that karate was one of the styles that was taught in the original Air Force combative measures. The hooks and crosses do have roots in boxing, something that Chris started to expand his training on as seen by his main melee move in Resident Evil Revelations, which takes place after Code Veronica. His training in boxing becomes much more apparent in Resident Evil 5. By looking at him, you can tell that he spent a considerable amount of time at the gym bulking up. And this is no coincidence. According to the art of Resident Evil 5, Chris's increased muscle mass was to show that he had trained heavily in order to fight Wesker barehanded. Unfortunately, when Chris and Jill confronted Wesker, things once again didn't go well. He was expecting a guy who could fight. He certainly wasn't expecting someone with superhuman speed, strength, and reflexes that can dodge bullets. But he still gives it a shot. He executes a great karate-style punch. He throws a spin hook kick. He tries punching him again several times. But every time Wesker either dodges the attack or brutally counters it. He finds himself in a one-armed choke, and Jill proceeds to save his life by tackling Wesker out of a window. And this is where the main story of Resident Evil 5 begins, and we can see more of his skills in Mercenaries mode, as well as Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D. His two strongest hand-to-hand styles remain a combination of boxing and karate. In terms of boxing, he's capable of throwing devastating hooks and uppercuts that send his enemies reeling, and with arms the size of tree trunks, that is probably not that unbelievable. Chris's most intense boxing combo, and one that shows that all his training paid off, shows up right here. Left hook, right hook. You can readily see his boxing training. However, Chris still relies on his karate training as well. First up, we've got a very strong back fist. And this karate punch right here is the same one we saw with Wesker previously. It's karate style because note how when he throws a punch, his other arm retracts by his waist. This sort of push-pull mechanism is readily seen in karate, among other martial arts. He's even got a stronger variation that fuses a bit of boxing into it with the wind-up, but still ends up being karate due to that aforementioned positioning of the other arm. In terms of kicks, he's got the same stomp he's been using since the beginning, but considering he did want to defeat Wesker, the only technique that could possibly achieve that is the push kick! Indeed, the legendary push kick. I've said way too much about this kick already, but if you'd like to hear more about it, check out my Captain America fighting skills video. Chris does start to demonstrate knowledge of grappling techniques in Resident Evil 5. There's a variation of the rear naked choke, but more significantly, he executes this technique. For context, he tanked several hits from a brainwashed P30 enhanced Jill. He needed to counterattack, but he didn't want to harm Jill. And what better way to accomplish that than to turn to what is known in martial arts as the gentle way, judo. Chris counterattacks Jill with this technique. In judo, this is known as a tai otoshi, or body drop. It's got plenty of variations depending on the situation, but its main components are pulling your opponent off balance with your hands, and then placing your legs so that your opponent trips over it. Chris exhibiting knowledge of judo fits in line with his training. Judo was also part of the Air Force Combatives curriculum. Emilio Mel Bruno, the man mentioned earlier who was primarily responsible for designing the program, was a judo teacher and retired as a 6th degree judo black belt. It must be said that in Resident Evil 5, Chris managed to successfully move a gigantic boulder by literally boxing with it. You heard that right, this man was strong enough to punch a boulder into lava. This even got referenced in Resident Evil Village. But despite the larger-than-life moments such as this, Resident Evil has always had its foundation in zombies. The zombies have taken many forms in the long saga, but always retains signature elements. And if you'd like to learn about how to draw those elements, I highly recommend Robert Marzullo's class on zombie art. Not only will you get an excellent primer on the principles of drawing, such as outlining, to the technical details, like how to add texture, you'll also get a helpful guide behind creating a zombie, like starting with a realistic human before adding zombie details. His techniques and thoughts apply to every kind of illustration, and I found myself incorporating them into my drawings as well. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. Most classes are also under 60 minutes with short lessons, so you don't feel overwhelmed and can learn at your own pace. And if you'd like to learn about something other than drawing, Skillshare offers classes on several other topics, including martial arts, photography, video, freelancing, and more. In the film and video category alone, there are classes on editing, cinematography, and do-it-yourself filming. It's curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. If learning about drawing or any other topic interests you, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. so you can start exploring your creativity today. In Resident Evil 6, Chris maintains several of the same techniques we've seen before, including the back fist, the karate punch, the stomp, and the rear naked choke. He also shows some of his combatives training by using his firearm as a striking weapon and this brief shoulder check, as well as this elbow strike. Staying in line with his combatives training, Chris also incorporates other elbow strikes, including the 12-6 elbow. These are also part of karate and modern day US Army combatives, and it's safe to assume they were part of the included training back when Chris was in the Air Force, which is why Chris is finally using those techniques, no doubt due to his further training in combatives by the time we are in Resident Evil 6. A technique I was extremely surprised to see Chris throw was this martello de negativa. For more information on this technique, check out my PS4 Spider-Man fighting styles video. The best style to group it to is capoeira, an art that uses the ground to add in as much power as possible to your kicks. Chris probably wanted to strengthen his ground fighting arsenal, something we see indications of in his fights with Leon. He begins the fight by swinging at Leon with his boxing training, and quickly reads Leon's incoming spin hook kick, so he ducks out of the way and responds with an elbow strike. Leon blocks it, so Chris begins to deliver knee strikes. A good observation here is that since he's finally kneeing a human opponent, and not a hideous monster, you can see how closely his technique resembles a knee strikes taught in combatives. Leon tries to use an elbow strike and a back fist on him but fails, and Chris takes the opportunity to dive in for a tackle. And here's where we go into a whole other style for Chris, and that is wrestling. What Chris is doing here is known as shooting in for a double leg takedown. In a normal wrestling match, it's required that one of your knees be on the ground to slam your opponent onto the mat with control. But considering this is a fight and not a wrestling match, Chris goes in a little higher. Ideally, Chris wanted him to land on the ground, but Leon stuffed the takedown by redirecting Chris's strength. But moving just like a wrestler, Chris quickly and comfortably places an arm on the floor and repositions himself to take Leon's back. Leon slips out of his grasp, so Chris turns to judo to finish the fight, this time throwing a classic ippon seonage by trapping Leon's arm and flipping him over him. Making a brief detour into Resident Evil Revelations 2, where Chris is a playable character in raid mode and wears his Resident Evil 6 uniform. His main melee attack is the same uppercut seen in Revelations. He can also use a katana if certain conditions are met. But since every other character in raid mode can also equip and use said katana as well, this means the ability to use a sword is absorbed from this special item. It's not due to the individual skill or training with it. Chris will thus not receive any sword fighting style in his final tally. We now find ourselves in Resident Evil 7. Since we're in a first person perspective, our viewpoint is a bit limited, but for extra context, I've provided clips of his moves from previous games. We can still see his karate style punch from first person, as well as his incredibly powerful uppercut, the classic Resident Evil zombie stomp, and the legendary push kick. In Resident Evil Village, Chris can strike the enemy with a weapon. He's still a fan of his karate style punch as well, and going back to his combatives background, he easily executes this pistol disarm with an elbow strike and kicks his opponent to the ground. This was briefly mentioned in the beginning of the video, but Chris has always had extensive training with the knife. And considering how he's continually learned new hand-to-hand techniques, the same also applies to knife techniques. Just like Leon and Jill before him, Chris will also receive Gali as a fighting style due to his extensive expertise and varied techniques with the knife. In conclusion, how many fighting styles does Chris Redfield know in the Resident Evil series? They are Air Force combative measures, boxing, karate, judo, capoeira, wrestling, and Gali, for a grand total of 7 fighting styles. This episode of Fighting Styles was sponsored by Skillshare. I'd like to thank each one of my Patreon members as their contribution helped in the making of this video. If you'd like to contribute and appear in the credits in the future, my Patreon page is Godzilla Rex and it's in the description below. Thanks for watching. What do you think of the Resident Evil games? What other characters should I analyze next? Let me know in the comments below, subscribe for more awesome videos, see you next time.